The night shift was always quiet on the Terran Defense Station. Lisa Morgan sat at her console, watching the screens that showed nothing but empty space and distant stars. She had been doing this job for 2 years now, and most nights were the same. Check the systems. Monitor the signals. Drink coffee. Stay awake, but tonight was different. At exactly 2 in the morning, her computer made a sound she had never heard before. A signal was coming in from deep space. Lisa leaned forward and studied the pattern on her screen. The signal was weak and broken, like someone trying to speak through static. It was not from any human ship or station. Lisa's hands moved quickly across her keyboard. She ran the signal through every translation program the station had. For 10 minutes, nothing worked. Then suddenly the computer beeped. It had found a match. The message was translating now, appearing on her screen one word at a time. Her eyes went wide as she read it. This was a distress call. An alien species called the Velnar were under attack. Their world was surrounded by enemy ships. Their defenses were failing. They were sending this message to everyone, to anyone who might hear it. They did not expect help to come. They just wanted someone to know they had existed. Lisa grabbed her phone and called her commander. Within minutes, the quiet station became busy with activity. Officers rushed to their posts. The message was sent up the chain of command, going higher and higher until it reached Admiral Richard Hayes on Earth. Admiral Hayes was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had fought in many battles during his long career. He had seen war and peace, victory and loss. When the message reached his desk, he read it 3 times. Then he called a meeting. The Terran High Command gathered in a secure room deep underground. Generals and admirals sat around a long table, looking at the translated message on the big screen. They all knew what it meant. Someone out there needed help. The question was whether humanity should answer. The debate started immediately. One general pointed out that Earth had only discovered faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. Compared to other species in the galaxy, humans were newcomers. They were still building their fleet, still learning how things worked out here among the stars. Most alien civilizations barely noticed Earth. Some did not even consider humans worth talking to. Another admiral brought up the distance. The Velnar system was 4 weeks away, even at the fastest speed their ships could manage. 4 weeks there and 4 weeks back. And Earth had no treaty with the Velnar. No agreement. No reason to risk their ships and crews for complete strangers. A third voice argued that getting involved in alien wars was dangerous. What if the enemy decided to come after Earth next? What if this dragged humanity into a conflict that could last for years? They had to think about their own people first. Admiral Hayes listened to all of them. He understood their concerns. They were smart, careful people who were trying to protect Earth. But then he looked at the message again, reading those desperate words. He thought about human history. He remembered all the times when people had cried out for help and no one came. He remembered the stories of cities that fell, of peoples who disappeared because the world did not care enough to act. Hayes stood up and faced the room. His voice was quiet but firm. He said that he understood the risks. He knew this could go wrong in 100 different ways. But he also knew that this was a moment that would define what kind of species humanity wanted to be. Were they going to be the kind that ignored the cry for help? Were they going to be just another selfish civilization that only cared about itself? The room fell silent. Some officers looked uncomfortable. Others nodded slowly. Hayes continued. He said that if humanity wanted respect from the other species in the galaxy, they had to earn it. And respect came from doing the right thing, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Within an hour, the decision was made. Earth would send a fleet, but it would be a volunteer mission. Any captain who wanted to stay behind could do so. No one would be forced to go. The call went out to every military base and space station. Commander Daniel Price was in his quarters on the warship Valiant when he got the message. He was a young captain, only 35 years old. The Valiant was his first real command, a brand new ship that still smelled like fresh paint and new metal. When he read about the mission, he did not hesitate. He sent his response immediately. The Valiant would go. Captain Amy Foster got the same message aboard the Horizon. She was older than Daniel, with 15 years of experience. She had a wife and 2 kids back on Earth. She thought about them for a long moment. Then she looked at her crew and asked them what they wanted to do. Every single person voted to go. Captain Lucas Gray commanded the Defiant, a heavy cruiser known for its powerful weapons. Lucas had a reputation for being cautious and careful. His crew expected him to decline the mission. But Lucas surprised them. He said yes without even calling a meeting. Captain Nina Wells led the Thunderstrike, one of the fastest ships in the fleet. When she heard about the mission, she actually smiled. Nina had joined the military because she wanted to make a difference. This was her chance. Within 24 hours, Admiral Hayes had his fleet. 12 warships had volunteered. 3 support carriers joined them, bringing supplies and medical equipment. In total, 4,000 human beings were preparing to jump into unknown space to help people they had never met. The politicians on Earth were nervous. Some tried to stop the mission. They called it reckless and dangerous. But public opinion was shifting. When news leaked about what was happening, ordinary people began to pay attention. Messages flooded government offices. People wanted their military to go. They wanted Earth to be the kind of world that helped others. The fleet gathered in orbit above Earth. The ships formed up in a neat formation, ready to jump. On each bridge, crews went through their final checks. Engines were tested. Weapons were charged. Jump drives were powered up. Admiral Hayes gave the order. One by one, the ships activated their jump drives. Space around them twisted and bent. Reality seemed to fold in on itself. Then in flashes of blue light, the fleet disappeared. Back on the station, Lisa Morgan sat at her console. She had watched the fleet depart on her screens. Now she had one more job to do. She typed a message and sent it back along the same frequency as the distress call. The message was simple and short. Just 5 words. But she hoped they would mean everything to whoever received them. The message said, "Hold on. Help is coming." The jump through space was like nothing else. When the ships traveled faster than light, everything outside became a blur of colors and strange shapes. Time moved differently here. 4 weeks would pass in the real universe, but inside the ships, it felt both longer and shorter at the same time. Captain Daniel Price stood on the bridge of the Valiant, watching the swirling colors outside his window. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Sophie Grant, was working at her station nearby. Sophie was good at her job. She was smart and careful, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Right now, she was reviewing everything they knew about the enemy. The enemy called themselves the Krathon Dominion. According to the information in the galactic databases, they were bad news. The Krathon had conquered 17 star systems in the last 100 years. They did not negotiate. They did not accept surrender. When they came to a world, they either took control completely or they destroyed it. There was no middle ground. Sophie looked up from her screen and walked over to Daniel. Her face showed concern. She pointed out that the human fleet was small. Just 12 warships against what might be dozens or even hundreds of enemy vessels. The Krathon had been fighting wars for centuries. They had experience and powerful technology. What could humans do against that? Daniel understood her worry, but he reminded her of something important. Throughout human history, people had won battles they should have lost. Not because they had the best weapons or the most soldiers. They won because they were stubborn, because they were creative, because they were willing to take risks that others thought were crazy. Humans did not always fight fair. Sometimes that was their greatest strength. On the carrier Resilience, Major Kyle Bennett was training his Marines. Kyle was a big man with a square jaw and a serious expression. He had been a Marine for 12 years and had seen combat before, but never against aliens. His soldiers were young and eager, but he could see the nervousness in their eyes. The training was intense. The Marines practiced close-quarters combat in the narrow corridors of the ship. They drilled on boarding enemy vessels. They learned how to breach doors and clear rooms. Kyle made them practice the same moves over and over until they could do them without thinking. But Kyle also taught them something else. He told them to stay flexible. They did not know what the Krathon looked like. They did not know how strong or fast they might be. So the Marines had to be ready to adapt. If a tactic did not work, they had to try something new immediately. In combat, the side that adapted faster usually won. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Emma Clark was getting ready in her own way. Emma was a skilled surgeon who had worked in field hospitals during conflicts on Earth. She knew how to operate under pressure. She knew how to save lives when everything was going wrong. But this mission worried her. The Velnar were aliens. Emma had no idea what their bodies were like inside. She did not know their blood type or how their organs worked. If wounded Velnar came to her ship, could she even help them? She spent hours reading every file she could find about alien biology. She studied diagrams and medical reports. She would figure it out somehow. She had to. The fleet stopped twice during the journey. There were automated human supply stations scattered along the major jump routes. These stations were unmanned, just warehouses in space where ships could refuel and restock. The fleet took on more food, more ammunition, more medical supplies, everything they might need for a battle. At the second stop, they received new information. A merchant ship had escaped from the Velnar system just days ago. The merchant captain had sent a message to the nearest human outpost. The news was bad. The planetary shields around Velnar Prime were failing. The Krathon bombardment was getting through. Cities were burning. The Velnar military was almost gone. They had maybe a few days left, maybe less. Admiral Hayes made a quick decision. He ordered the fleet to push their jump drives harder. The drives could handle more power for a short time, though it was risky. If a drive overloaded, the ship would be stranded in deep space. But they had to take that chance. The Velnar did not have time for a careful approach. Chief Mechanic Ryan Hughes got the order and shook his head. Ryan worked in the engine room of the Valiant, a hot and noisy place filled with humming machines. He was good with technology, able to fix almost anything, but what the Admiral wanted was dangerous. Pushing the jump drives this hard could burn them out completely. Still, Ryan understood why they had to do it. He gathered his engineering team and explained what needed to happen. They would increase power to the drives carefully, watching every gauge and meter. If something started to go wrong, they would have maybe 10 seconds to fix it before the whole system failed. His team nodded. They were scared, but they were ready. The engines roared louder. The ships moved faster through jump space. What should have taken 2 more weeks now took only 1. The fleet raced toward the Velnar system, hoping they would not be too late. During that final week, the crews prepared for battle. Weapons officers checked every gun and missile launcher. Pilots ran simulations, practicing attack patterns. The cooks made sure everyone ate well, knowing it might be their last good meal for a while. Even small things mattered now. On every ship, people wrote letters. Just in case. Some wrote to their families back on Earth. Others wrote to friends. A few wrote to people they loved but had never told. The letters were sealed and stored in secure files. If a ship was destroyed, the files would automatically transmit back to Earth. It was a grim tradition, but an important one. Captain Daniel Price wrote a letter to his parents. He told them he was proud to be doing this. He told them not to be sad if he did not come back. This was the right thing to do, and he had never been more sure of anything in his life. He sealed the letter and stored it away, then went back to his duties. As they got closer to the Velnar system, Admiral Hayes gave an important order. The fleet went silent. All radio transmissions stopped. Active sensors were turned off. The ships moved through space like ghosts, using only passive detection to see where they were going. They needed to arrive without the Krathon knowing they were coming. Surprise would be their greatest weapon. Finally, after 4 weeks of travel that felt like both a lifetime and a heartbeat, the fleet reached the edge of the Velnar system. The order came down. Prepare to exit jump space. This was it. No more training. No more preparing. Whatever was waiting for them on the other side, they were about to find out. The ships dropped out of jump space at the same moment. Reality snapped back into focus. The swirling colors disappeared, replaced by normal space filled with stars. And immediately, every sensor on every ship began screaming warnings. What they saw made their hearts sink. The situation was even worse than they had feared. 43 Krathon warships surrounded Velnar Prime like a metal noose tightening around a neck. The enemy vessels were huge, each one bristling with weapons. They hung in space in perfect formation, methodical and patient. They did not need to hurry. The planet below them was helpless. The surface of Velnar Prime glowed with fires. Whole sections of the planet were dark where cities used to shine. Orbital defense platforms floated as broken debris, torn apart by enemy fire. As the human fleet watched, a small group of Velnar ships made a desperate attack run. The Krathon destroyed them in seconds. It was like watching insects throw themselves against a window. On the bridge of the Valiant, Lieutenant Sophie Grant read off the numbers. Her voice was steady, but Daniel could hear the worry underneath. 43 enemy warships. Most of them were bigger than anything in the human fleet. The Krathon had been doing this for a long time. They knew how to destroy worlds. Admiral Hayes looked at the tactical display for a long moment. Everyone waited for his orders. Some probably expected him to order a retreat. This was suicide, 12 ships against 43, but Hayes did not order a retreat. Instead, he smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone about to do something crazy. The Admiral's orders came through to every ship. They would not fight the way the Krathon expected. They would not line up and trade shots. The Krathon fought like they were following a rulebook. Humans were going to throw that rulebook out the window. They would hit fast, hit hard, and never stay in one place long enough to become an easy target. The human fleet split into 3 groups. Captain Daniel Price took the Valiant and 5 other warships on a high-speed run along the edge of the Krathon formation. They used the debris field from destroyed orbital stations as cover. The broken pieces of metal hid them from enemy sensors until they were almost on top of the Krathon ships. Then they opened fire. Railguns launched solid metal slugs at incredible speeds. Missiles streaked through space, leaving trails of white exhaust. The attack caught the Krathon by surprise. Several enemy ships took heavy damage before they could even turn to face the threat. The human ships did not stay to fight. They fired and immediately broke away, disappearing back into the debris field. The Krathon tried to respond, but their ships were too slow. They were built for raw power, not speed or agility. By the time they turned their weapons toward where the human ships had been, those ships were already somewhere else. Captain Amy Foster led the second group. The Horizon and 2 frigates came in from a completely different angle, moving fast and low. They targeted the Krathon command ships, the big vessels that were coordinating the enemy fleet. Amy's weapons officer was excellent at his job. He put missiles right through the enemy shields, hitting communications arrays and sensor towers. Without clear communications, the Krathon formation began to fall apart. Ships were getting different orders or no orders at all. Some tried to chase the human ships. Others stayed in position, waiting for commands that did not come. The perfect formation became confused and scattered. Captain Lucas Gray brought the third group in from above. The Defiant and the Carrier group had circled way out and come back from an unexpected direction. The Krathon had to split their forces to respond. Some ships moved to intercept Lucas. Others tried to chase Daniel. A few stayed to deal with Amy's group. The enemy was reacting instead of acting. That was exactly what Admiral Hayes wanted. Then the trap snapped shut. All 3 human groups converged at once from different directions. They focused their fire on single targets, overwhelming the shields of one Krathon ship at a time. Captain Nina Wells on the Thunderstrike had the fastest ship in the fleet. She used that speed to get behind a massive enemy flagship and fired everything she had at its engines. The flagship went dark, drifting helplessly, but the Krathon were not helpless. They were experienced warriors who had fought many battles. They began to adapt. They stopped trying to chase the human ships and instead created kill zones, areas of space so full of weapons fire that nothing could survive passing through them. The humans had to change tactics or die. A frigate called the Ranger took a direct hit from a Krathon plasma cannon. The weapon burned through the ship's armor like it was paper. Ranger's captain gave the order to abandon ship. Escape pods launched in all directions. Some made it. Some did not. The Ranger exploded, becoming just more debris in an already crowded battlefield. The cruiser Steadfast lost its main weapons when a Krathon missile found a weak spot in its shields. The ship could still fly, but it could not fight anymore. Its captain pulled back, using the Steadfast's remaining power to rescue survivors from destroyed escape pods. On the surface of Velnar Prime, people watched the sky. The Velnar had 4 arms and gray skin. They were taller than humans with large eyes that could see in low light. Right now, those eyes were fixed on the battle happening above their world. They could not believe what they were seeing. Someone had come. Someone was fighting for them. Counselor Vren was the leader of the Velnar. He was old, his skin wrinkled and his movements slow. He stood in what was left of the government building and watched screens showing the battle. His 4 hands trembled. He had sent that distress call not expecting anyone to answer. Now there were ships up there. Strange ships he did not recognize fighting against the Krathon, fighting for his people. Major Kyle Bennett's voice came through the communication system. His Marines were in drop pods ready to launch. Kyle requested permission to land and assist ground forces. Admiral Hayes gave the order, go. The pods fell through the atmosphere like meteors, 2 pods took hits from enemy fire and exploded, but the rest made it through. They crashed down in the capital city, their armored sides burning hot from re-entry. The doors blew open and human Marines rushed out, weapons ready. Kyle and his team linked up with Velnar soldiers who were defending the city center. The Velnar stared at the humans in amazement. They had never seen this species before. But there was no time for introductions. The Krathon had ground troops in the city too, heavily armored soldiers who had landed earlier. The fighting was fierce and close. The Krathon used plasma rifles that could melt through walls. Kyle's Marines used ballistic weapons, old-fashioned guns that fired solid bullets. The Krathon were not used to facing such weapons. Their armor could handle energy weapons well, but bullets punched right through. Sergeant Megan Ford led a squad into a collapsed building where Velnar civilians were trapped. The building was unstable, ready to fall completely. Megan and her team worked quickly, pulling people out one by one. A Velnar child looked up at Megan with wide eyes, not understanding who these strange beings were, but knowing they were there to help. Back in space, the battle continued for 18 brutal hours. Ships on both sides took damage. The humans lost the Ranger completely. 6 other ships were badly hurt. But they destroyed or disabled 29 Krathon vessels. The enemy's perfect formation was broken. Their careful plan was ruined. Finally, the remaining Krathon ships began to pull back. They moved away from the planet, regrouping at the edge of the system. They were not retreating completely. They were just stepping back to figure out what to do next. They had expected an easy victory. Instead, they had run into humans. Velnar Prime was saved. For now. But everyone knew this was not over. The human fleet moved into orbit around Velnar Prime slowly. Like wounded animals limping to safety, smoke drifted from damaged hulls. Emergency lights blinked on ships that had lost main power. Repair crews in spacesuits crawled over the outside of vessels, welding patches onto holes and replacing broken parts. Captain Daniel Price walked through the corridors of the Valiant, looking at the damage. Scorch marks blackened the walls where power conduits had overloaded. One whole section was sealed off because it had lost atmosphere. The portside railgun was completely destroyed, just a twisted piece of metal now. But the ship was still flying. That was what mattered. Lieutenant Sophie Grant met him in the medical bay. Her uniform was torn and she had a bandage on her arm, but she was alive. She gave Daniel the casualty report. 63 wounded, 12 dead. Daniel took the list of names and read each one carefully. He would have to write to their families. He would have to explain why their sons and daughters, husbands and wives were not coming home. On the planet's surface, Major Kyle Bennett stood in the ruins of what had been a beautiful city. The Velnar capital had tall buildings that curved gracefully toward the sky. Or it used to. Now many of those buildings were broken stumps. Streets were filled with rubble. But the city was still there. The people were still alive. Velnar civilians emerged from underground shelters, blinking in the daylight. They saw human soldiers standing guard, weapons ready but lowered. The Velnar approached slowly, cautiously. Some reached out with their 4 hands to touch the Marine's armor, as if they could not quite believe these beings were real. One Velnar child, no more than 6 or 7 years old by human standards, walked up to Kyle and looked up at him. The child said something in the Velnar language. Kyle's translator device took a moment to process it, then spoke in his ear. The child was asking if the humans were angels. Kyle did not know how to answer that. He just knelt down and smiled at the kid. "No," he said. "Just people who heard you needed help." Counselor Vren requested a meeting with Admiral Hayes. They spoke through holographic projection, their images appearing in each other's command centers. Vren's forearms moved and what the translation software said was a gesture of deep gratitude. He thanked the humans over and over. He had never expected anyone to answer the distress call. The galaxy did not work that way. Species looked after their own interests. Nobody risked their lives for strangers. Admiral Hayes listened patiently. When Vren finished, Hayes spoke quietly. He explained that humans remembered what it was like to be alone and scared. They remembered times in their history when they had called for help and nobody came. They had made a decision. They would be different. When someone called for help, humans would answer. Not because they had to, because it was right. Vren's large eyes grew even larger. Then he said something that made the mood in the room change. He said the Krathon would return. The Empire did not forgive defiance. They would bring more ships, bigger weapons, and next time they would not be surprised. By helping the Velnar, the humans had made a powerful enemy. Hayes nodded. He already knew this. Every captain knew it. Every sailor and marine knew it. They had known the risks before they jumped. But they had come anyway. That was the point. Doing the right thing was never safe. It was never easy. But it was always worth it. The human fleet immediately began helping the Velnar rebuild their defenses. Chief Mechanic Ryan Hughes took a team down to the planet to work on the orbital defense generators. The Velnar technology was different from human technology, but the basic principles were the same. Ryan figured out how their systems worked and showed the Velnar engineers how to repair them faster. Dr. Emma Clark set up a field hospital in the capital city. She worked alongside Velnar doctors, learning their medical practices while teaching them hers. The first time she performed surgery on a Velnar patient, she was terrified. Their internal organs were arranged differently than humans. Their blood was a different color. But life was life. She found the injury, fixed it, and closed the wound. The patient survived. A Velnar doctor worked beside her, translating medical terms and explaining their biology. At first, their conversations were awkward and formal. But as they worked together, saving lives side by side, they became friends. The doctor's name was difficult for Emma to pronounce, so he told her to just call him Ven. Ven told Emma that he had 3 children. He showed her pictures. Emma showed him pictures of her family back on Earth. Captain Amy Foster took the Horizon on a scouting mission to the outer system. Her sensors detected something worrying. The Krathon had left communication buoys behind when they retreated. Those buoys were sending signals into deep space. The enemy was calling for help. Calling for reinforcements. Amy ran calculations based on the signal strength and direction. She estimated they had about 10 days before a new Krathon fleet arrived. And this fleet would be bigger. Much bigger. She sent her report back to Admiral Hayes. The news spread through the human fleet quickly. 10 days to prepare, 10 days before round 2. Some sailors were scared. Some were exhausted and wanted to go home. But when their captains asked who wanted to stay and fight, every single hand went up. They had started this. They would finish it. Back on Earth, the story of the battle was spreading. News agencies ran constant updates. People gathered in public spaces to watch footage from the combat. The images were grainy and shaky, recorded by ships' external cameras, but they showed everything. The desperate fight against impossible odds. The human ships diving and weaving between enemy fire. The moment when Velnar Prime was saved, public opinion shifted dramatically. Before the battle, many people on Earth had been unsure about the mission. Now they were proud. Children played games pretending to be Marines fighting on Velnar Prime. Artists created paintings and songs about the fleet. The 12 ships that had volunteered became famous. Their captains became heroes. The government faced enormous pressure to send reinforcements. People flooded the streets demanding action. They wanted Earth to support the brave men and women who had answered the call. Politicians who had opposed the original mission now changed their minds, or at least pretended to. Finally, the Terran High Command authorized a second wave. 20 warships would make the journey to Velnar space, fresh crews. Full ammunition, undamaged vessels. They would take 4 weeks to arrive, just like the first fleet had. But they were coming. When Admiral Hayes received the news, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Not because he needed the help to win, but because it meant Earth was committed now. Humanity had made a choice about what kind of species they wanted to be. They were the ones who answered the call. Lisa Morgan, still at her station orbiting Earth, worked with Velnar communication officers through long-distance channels. Together they broadcast a message to nearby star systems. The message warned about the Krathon Dominion. It told the story of what had happened at Velnar Prime, and it called for an alliance. Any species that believed in helping others was welcome to join. Lisa did not know if anyone would listen. The galaxy was a big place and most civilizations kept to themselves. But she sent the message anyway, because you never knew. Maybe someone out there would hear it and decide to act. On the 10th day, Captain Lucas Gray was on watch when his sensors lit up. He stared at the screen, counting the contacts as they appeared. His hands tightened on the armrests of his command chair. He opened a channel to all ships. The Krathon were back. 68 warships this time, including 3 massive vessels that could only be dreadnoughts. the biggest and most powerful ships the enemy had. This was not a raid or a patrol. This was an armada. The Krathon were done playing around. The real battle was about to begin, and Earth's reinforcements were still weeks away. The Krathon armada came through the edge of the system like a wave of darkness. 68 warships moving in perfect formation. The 3 dreadnoughts were at the center, each one the size of a small city. Around them flew cruisers and destroyers, all of them fresh and undamaged. This fleet had come to finish what the first one had started. Admiral Hayes gathered his captains for one final meeting. They met through holographic projection, their images appearing on each other's bridges. Hayes looked at each face. These people had already fought one impossible battle. Now he was asking them to fight another. The odds were even worse this time. 3-1 against them. Maybe worse, someone should have suggested retreat. The smart move was to evacuate what civilians they could and fall back. Wait for Earth's reinforcements to arrive. But nobody said it. Not one captain suggested leaving. They had come to save the Velnar. If they left now, everything they had sacrificed would mean nothing. Captain Daniel Price spoke first. He said they had made a promise. The Velnar were counting on them. More than that, the whole galaxy was watching. This was humanity's moment to show what they were made of. They had to hold. Earth's reinforcements would arrive in 6 days. 6 days. They just had to survive that long. Admiral Hayes laid out the plan. They would not try to fight the Krathon fleet head-on. That would be suicide. Instead, they would use the system itself as a weapon. The Velnar system had a large asteroid belt. Captain Nina Wells would lead half the fleet in a fighting retreat, drawing the enemy into the belt. Meanwhile, Captain Lucas Gray and his group would mine the asteroids and set traps. The Velnar provided everything they had left. Counselor Vren activated defense satellites that had been sitting dormant for generations. They were old technology, barely working, but every little bit helped. Velnar engineers worked alongside humans to make the satellites operational. On the ground, Major Kyle Bennett prepared for a siege. His Marines trained Velnar civilians in basic combat. They taught them how to hold a rifle, how to take cover, how to work together. The Velnar were not warriors by nature. They were scientists and artists, farmers and teachers. But they learned quickly. When your world is at stake, you find strength you did not know you had. The Krathon fleet approached the planet slowly and carefully. They had learned from the first battle. They were not going to be surprised again. Their sensors swept space constantly looking for traps. Their weapons were charged and ready. They moved like a hunting pack that knew its prey was wounded. The first strike came without warning. The Krathon fired on an orbital station, destroying it in a single shot. The explosion lit up the sky over Velnar Prime. It was a message. A reminder of what they could do. The siege had begun. The human fleet engaged immediately. Captain Nina Wells took the Thunderstrike and her group forward. They fired missiles and railgun shots, hitting the edges of the Krathon formation. Then they turned and ran. The Krathon pursued exactly as planned. The enemy wanted to crush them quickly. They followed the human ships deeper into the system. As the Krathon fleet entered the asteroid belt, Captain Lucas Gray gave the signal. Hidden mines activated all throughout the belt. Explosions blossomed like deadly flowers. Several Krathon ships took damage. One destroyer was destroyed completely, torn apart by multiple mine strikes. The enemy fleet slowed down, suddenly cautious. That hesitation cost them. The human fleet regrouped and attacked from multiple directions at once. They used the asteroids as cover, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. The Krathon tried to respond, but the asteroids interfered with their targeting. Every time they thought they had a clear shot, a human ship would duck behind a rock. The battle became a grinding, exhausting struggle. It went on for hours, then a full day, then 2 days. Ships on both sides took damage. The frigate Courageous took a direct hit and exploded. All hands were lost. The cruiser Dauntless was hit so badly that it crashed into one of Velnar Prime's moons. The crew evacuated just in time, floating in spacesuits until rescue ships could pick them up. Captain Daniel Price pushed the Valiant harder than he ever had before. The ship's hull groaned under the stress. Warning alarms blared constantly. Lieutenant Sophie Grant worked at her station, sweat running down her face, coordinating point defense to shoot down incoming missiles. They were all running on determination and caffeine now. In the medical bay, Dr. Emma Clark performed surgery after surgery. The ship shook around her from weapons impacts, but she kept her hands steady. She saved a wounded Velnar child who had been brought up from the surface. She lost 3 human sailors whose injuries were too severe. She kept working because that was all she could do. On the 3rd day of battle, something unexpected happened. New contacts appeared on the sensors. For a moment, everyone thought it was more Krathon ships. But the identification codes were different. 5 ships dropped out of jump space and moved to join the human fleet. They were Talvek ships. The Talvek Confederacy was a nearby civilization that humans had barely met before. Their ships were not particularly powerful, but they were here. Captain Solvrin, the Talvek commander, sent a message. They had received the broadcast from Lisa Morgan. They had debated what to do. Some had argued for staying neutral. But then they had watched the humans fighting against impossible odds for people they barely knew. The Talvek had decided that the galaxy needed more beings like the humans. So they came. 5 ships was not much, but it was 5 more than the humans had before, and more importantly, it showed the Krathon something they had not expected. This was no longer humans versus Krathon. This was becoming a coalition. The Krathon began to falter. Their perfect plan was falling apart. They had expected to crush a small human fleet easily. Instead, they were stuck in a grinding battle that was costing them ships and time. Their commanders argued among themselves about what to do next. On the 5th day, the Krathon made one final desperate push. They committed everything to breaking through to Velnar Prime. Their dreadnoughts moved forward, their massive weapons tearing through space. Several human ships were forced to retreat, their shields nearly gone. On the planet, Krathon dropships landed near the capital city. Major Kyle Bennett and his Marines, fighting alongside Velnar soldiers and armed civilians, met them head-on. The fighting was brutal. Sergeant Megan Ford held a critical intersection for 7 straight hours, her squad refusing to give ground even when they ran low on ammunition. In space, Captain Amy Foster found herself in a terrible situation. The Horizon's weapons had failed. Enemy ships were closing in. She had 2 choices: retreat and leave a hole in the defensive line, or do something crazy. Amy chose crazy. She ordered her crew to evacuate to escape pods, then aimed her dying ship at a Krathon dreadnought. At the last moment, Chief Mechanic Ryan Hughes managed to restore power to the engines. The boost of speed gave the Horizon just enough momentum. The ship crashed into the dreadnought's side, crippling it. The dreadnought went dark and began to drift. Amy's crew survived, picked up by other ships. The Horizon was destroyed, but it had taken one of the enemy's biggest weapons out of the fight. On the 6th day, the sensors detected new arrivals. 20 human warships dropped out of jump space at the edge of the system. Earth's reinforcements had arrived. They were fresh, undamaged, and ready to fight. They charged into the battle immediately. The tide turned completely. The Krathon fleet, battered and exhausted, found itself facing a reinforced enemy. Their dreadnoughts were damaged. Many of their smaller ships were destroyed. They had lost nearly half their fleet. And now 20 more human warships were coming at them. The Krathon commanders made the only decision they could. They ordered a full retreat. The enemy fleet turned and fled, leaving the system as quickly as they could. Admiral Hayes ordered ships to pursue them to the edge of the system, making sure they were really leaving. When the last Krathon ship jumped away, a strange silence fell over the Velnar system. For the first time in weeks, there was no weapons fire, no explosions, just the quiet of space and the relief of survival. Velnar Prime was saved. The siege was over, and humanity had proven something important to the galaxy. The ceremony took place on the surface of Velnar Prime, in a plaza that had been hastily cleared of rubble. Thousands of Velnar gathered to watch. Humans stood alongside them, Marines still in their combat armor, sailors in their dress uniforms. The Talvek representatives were there too, their ship still in orbit above. Councillor Vren stood before the crowd, his forearms raised. His voice carried across the plaza, translated into multiple languages so everyone could understand. He spoke of the darkest days his people had ever known. He spoke of sending a distress call into the void, not expecting anyone to answer. He spoke of the moment when sensors detected ships arriving, ships that should not have been there. Vren's voice cracked with emotion. Tears ran down his face, something humans had never seen a Velnar do before. He said that his people had learned something important. They had learned they were not alone in the universe, not in the way they had thought. Yes, there were many species among the stars, but most of them cared only for themselves. The Velnar had accepted this as the way things were. Then the humans came. A species the Velnar had never even heard of before, strangers from across the galaxy, who risked everything to answer a call for help. Friends said that the Velnar would never forget this. He formally offered humanity a permanent alliance. The Velnar and humans would be friends and partners from this day forward. Admiral Hayes stepped forward to accept. He was tired. They were all tired. The battle had cost them dearly. 5 ships destroyed, 8 more badly damaged, hundreds of casualties. Good people who would never see Earth again. But Hayes stood straight and spoke clearly. He said that humanity accepted the alliance with honor. But more importantly, he wanted the Velnar to understand something. This was not about alliances or treaties or political advantage. This was about something more basic. When someone calls for help, you answer, not because of what you might gain, not because it is safe, but because it is the right thing to do. Hayes said that humanity remembered what it was like to be alone and afraid. Throughout their history, there had been times when people cried out and no one came. They had decided they would never be the ones who ignored that cry. If it meant making enemies, so be it. If it meant risking their ships and their lives, so be it. Some things were worth the cost. The crowd was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then more joined in. Soon the whole plaza erupted in applause, Velnar and humans and Talvek all applauding together. It was not just celebration of victory. It was recognition of something new being born. A different way of doing things among the stars. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Every species with communications technology heard the story. The Krathon Dominion, one of the most powerful empires in known space, had been defeated, not by a superior military, not by advanced technology, but by a coalition of species who decided that doing the right thing mattered more than staying safe. Other civilizations began to look at humanity differently. Before, they had seen humans as newcomers, young and inexperienced, a species that had barely learned to travel between stars. Now they saw something else. They saw a species that would fight for strangers, that would stand against overwhelming odds for people they had never met. That was the kind of ally everyone wanted. That was the kind of friend everyone needed. Within months, 7 more species reached out to Earth requesting formal alliances. They all said the same thing. They wanted to be part of what humanity was building. A new coalition based not on power or profit, but on the simple idea that good people help each other. Captain Daniel Price stood on the bridge of the newly repaired Valiant. The ship had been patched up and was ready to fly again. The scorch marks were still there, reminders of the battle. Daniel liked having them there. They told a story worth remembering. Lisa Morgan's voice came through the communication system. She was back at her station orbiting Earth, still monitoring signals from across the galaxy. She had news. 3 distress calls had come in from different systems. 3 more species in trouble. 3 more chances to make a difference. Daniel looked around his bridge. His crew had been through hell. They were exhausted. Some were still recovering from injuries. They had earned the right to rest, to go home and see their families. He would not blame anyone who wanted to decline this mission. He asked the question anyway. Who wanted to answer these calls? Every hand on the bridge went up. Not just some of them, all of them. Lieutenant Sophie Grant smiled at him. Of course they were going. This was what they did now. This was what it meant to be human among the stars. The fleet set course for the nearest distress signal. Other ships joined them. Velnar vessels, still rebuilding but ready to help. Talvik ships, proud to be part of the coalition. Even some species that humans had barely met sent a ship or 2. The fleet that had started with 12 volunteers was growing into something bigger. Back on Earth, the story of the Battle of Velnar Prime became legend. Children played games reenacting the fight. They argued over who got to be Captain Price or Admiral Hayes or Major Bennett. Schools taught about it in history classes. The names of those who had died were engraved on monuments in every major city. More importantly, the story changed how people thought. Earth's military was flooded with volunteers. Everyone wanted to be part of the fleet that answered the call. But it was not just about glory or adventure. People understood now that humanity had a role to play in the galaxy. They could be the ones who made things better. Every communication station in human space kept channels open, listening for distress calls. Operators like Lisa Morgan sat at their consoles watching and waiting. They knew that somewhere out there someone might need help. And when that call came, humans would answer. Dr. Emma Clark stayed on Velnar Prime for 6 months, helping to train a new generation of Velnar medical professionals. Her friend Ven worked beside her every day. When she finally returned to Earth, she brought with her a complete database of Velnar medicine. She shared it freely with every hospital and medical school on Earth. Knowledge saved lives. The more people knew, the more lives they could save. Chief Mechanic Ryan Hughes received a medal for his work keeping the fleet running during impossible conditions. He attended the ceremony but gave the medal to his team. They had all done the work together, he said. One person could not do much, but a team working together could do miracles. Major Kyle Bennett and Sergeant Megan Ford returned to Earth as heroes. The government wanted them to give speeches and appear at events. They did it for a while because people needed to hear the story, but eventually they requested to return to active duty. There was more work to do, more people to help. Captain Amy Foster got a new ship, another cruiser named the Horizon 2. On her first day aboard, she gathered her crew and told them what the name meant. The original Horizon had been destroyed, sacrificed to save others. This new ship would carry on that legacy. It would be a ship that answered the call. The galaxy was changing. Slowly at first, then faster. Species that had stayed isolated for centuries began reaching out to each other. Alliances formed. Trade routes opened. People who had never trusted anyone outside their own kind began to see possibilities they had not imagined. And at the center of it all was a simple idea. An idea that humans had brought with them from Earth. The idea that when someone needs help, you help them. Not because you have to, not because you will get something in return, but because that is what good people do. The Krathon Dominion still existed. They were still powerful, but they were no longer the biggest threat in the galaxy. Now there was something they had to worry about. A growing coalition of species who refused to be bullied, who stood together, who answered the call. Years later, a historian would write about this moment. She would call it the turning point. The moment when the galaxy learned that sometimes the smallest voice could create the biggest change. The Velnar had sent a distress call not expecting anyone to answer. And because humanity did answer, everything changed. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is care about someone you have never met. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is compassion. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply being the kind of person who hears someone calling for help and says, "Yes, I will come." The SOS reached Earth, and the humans sent a fleet, and nothing in the galaxy was ever the same again.